Well, good morning, fellow patriots.
Good morning.
Welcome to the 360th consecutive Friday meeting of the East Valley Red Friday Patriots. Our sincere thanks to each of you for joining us this morning to share in our camaraderie and to demonstrate our support for America's deployed warfighters as we enthusiastically carry out the mission of R.E.D. to remember everyone deployed. Speaking of deployed, we're currently experiencing a rather perilous time in the Middle East. Life and limb are at stake, as we have already witnessed, with 13 confirmed U.S. service members' death, 415 injuries. And reported injuries include traumatic brain injuries, shrapnel wounds, and burns. So to each of you who have donned those red shirts in a show of solidarity, thank you. We appreciate your support for our deployed warriors. Only a short while ago, I was enjoying breakfast with a longtime friend who happens to be an old Navy veteran who served on active duty for 8 years. He told me the story about this young Naval Academy graduate who was in a terrible car accident. But due to the heroics of the hospital staff, the only permanent injury he sustained was the loss of his right ear. And since he wasn't physically impaired, he remained in the military and eventually became a Rear Admiral. However, during his career, he was always sensitive about his appearance due to the loss of that ear. Well, one day, the Admiral had set aside time to interview 2 Navy Master Chiefs and a Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant for a senior enlisted position on his personal staff. The first Master Chief was a surface-type Navy, and it was a great interview. And at the end of that interview, the Admiral asked him, he said, "Do you notice anything different about me?" Well, the Master Chief said rather bluntly, "Why, yes, Admiral. I couldn't help but notice you're missing your starboard ear. So I don't know whether this impacts your hearing on that side." Well, the Admiral got very angry at this lack of tact, and he kicked the Master Chief out of his office. Now, the next candidate was an aviation Master Chief. And when asked this same question, he said, quite direct, "Well, yes, Admiral, you seem to be short one ear." Well, the Admiral was rather enraged and threw him out also. So the third interview was with a Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant. And surprisingly, that Master Gunny was articulate for a Marine. He was very, very sharp, and he seemed to know more than 2 Navy Master Chiefs combined. Well, the Admiral really wanted this guy, but he went ahead with the same question. He said, "Master Gunny, do you notice anything different about me?" And to his surprise, the Master Gunny said, "Yes, Admiral, you wear contact lenses." Well, the Admiral was very impressed and thought to himself, what an incredibly tactful Marine. And then the Admiral said, "And how do you know that, Master Gunny?" And the Gunny said, "Well, sir, it's pretty hard to hear with glasses with only one ear." More recently, I've heard the word appeasement used often by numerous political commentators, specifically as it pertains to the lack thereof by our current administration regarding the armed conflict in Iran. Defined appeasement is the policy of making concessions to an aggressive power to avoid conflict and yielding to their demands to maintain temporary peace. Historically, it refers to Britain and France's 1930s policies towards Nazi Germany, aimed at avoiding war, but it generally means satisfying demands to calm hostile entities. Now, many of you here today are too young to remember former President Ronald Reagan. That's meant as a compliment, by the way. On the other hand, some of us might be too senile to remember any former president, me included. Let's take a moment and listen to former President Ronald Reagan's thoughts on appeasement during the 1980s heightened threat of nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. And fast forward to current day and the threat of a rogue nation willing to rain terror on a region, if not the world, in their quest for nuclear power. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do have first-time guests that have joined us this morning. Todd and Amber Freeman, will you guys stand up, please? If I am not mistaken, I think you have some kind of relationship to Chuck and Inez Heinemann, do you not?
Yes.
And what is that?
Son-in-law. Repeat. I am the son-in-law.
You have just moved into this area from where?
Seattle.
From Seattle.
Yes.
So you have now settled in Gilbert.
Yes.
And we are absolutely elated to have you. I can assure you we have the utmost admiration and respect for Chuck and Inez, and I'm sure that you are proud of them as well. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you'll return soon.
Yes. Thank you.
You
Thank
bet.
you.
May I have a hoo-ah for these guests? Thank you. At this time, I would like to ask Colonel Ted Confederec to come forward and introduce our guest speaker for this morning.
Good morning. This morning I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, Rear Admiral James P. Schear, United States Navy, retired. Admiral Schear is a native Midwesterner from the Buckeye State of Ohio. He is a 1967 graduate of the United States Naval Academy and served in the Navy on active duty in the Naval Reserve for 37 years as a naval aviator. He has 3 combat tours in Vietnam and selection as a squadron commanding officer before his promotion to Rear Admiral. As a 2-star flag officer, Admiral Schear has served as the Vice Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, consisting of over 118,000 sailors and Marines, 186 ships, and 1,300 aircraft. Additionally, there are 18 major shore stations providing training, maintenance, and logistics support for that fleet. He also served as the Deputy Commander of the 2nd Fleet, which operates primarily in the Atlantic Ocean from the North Pole to the South Pole and from the shores of the United States to the west coast of Europe. The 2nd Fleet also operates along both coasts of South America and part of the west coast of Central America. In all, 2nd Fleet covers more than 38 million square miles. Additionally, the Admiral served as Deputy Commander of Patrol Wings Pacific, which consists of U.S. naval aviation units responsible for commanding, training, and maintaining maritime patrol and reconnaissance squadrons in the Pacific region and focusing on anti-submarine warfare and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Joint duty with other branches of service includes service as the Airborne Emergency Action Officer, flying nuclear missions aboard Looking Glass aircraft, the historic code name given to an airborne command and control center operated by the United States. It provides command and control of U.S. nuclear forces in the event that ground-based command centers have been destroyed or otherwise rendered inoperable. Additionally, he served as a member of the Reserve Policy Board, advising the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs on Guard and Reserve matters. Concurrent with his military service, Admiral Schear was an internationally qualified commercial airline captain and instructor pilot, holding numerous leadership roles within the commercial pilot community, including Vice President for Restructuring and Corporate Security at U.S. Airways Incorporated. He is recognized for his leadership in U.S. Airways' successful emergence from bankruptcy and subsequent restructuring of its enterprise, spanning operations, marketing, safety, and security. Taking early retirement from the airline to serve following 9/11, he joined the Transportation Security Administration at the agency's inception and held a succession of high-level positions as a member of the Senior Executive Service. He was appointed Deputy Assistant Administrator for Aviation Operations at TSA's very onset. As the Deputy Assistant Administrator for TSA's aviation operations, he oversaw the buildup of a workforce of more than 70,000 personnel and was responsible for planning and managing all screening activities at 448 commercial airports, administering all inspection programs, and directing all agency headquarters and field personnel. Additionally, he served with the Federal Aviation Administration as Vice President of Safety within the Air Traffic Organization. For 50 years, Admiral Schear has been married to the former Sharon Dobbs of Los Altos, California. When they met, Sharon was a Pan Am flight attendant based in London. After several cross-country moves, they now live in the Phoenix area and are the parents of 4 adult children and grandparents of 4, all living in the greater Phoenix area. Sharon has joined us this morning as well, and we're elated to have you here at our Red Friday Assembly, Sharon. Here to highlight his long and honorable Armed Forces career, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Red Friday welcome to Rear Admiral Upper Half, James Schear.
Oh, thanks, everybody. That reminds me of a funeral where the widow was in the front row, and it was a casket up there, and she had her 3 sons with her, and the minister was going on about all the wonderful things the deceased had done, and the woman was listening. She finally turns around to her son and says, "Go up there and make sure that's your dad. This doesn't sound like him." So I'm not used to this sound system. Last time I gave some remarks was a long time ago. They didn't have a sound system, and after I talked for a couple of minutes, I saw in the back the guy giving me the universal signal, that I needed to add to the volume. Bang them together. We got to hear back here. So I spoke up a little bit, and I said, "Can you hear me now?" And the guy in the front row turns around and says, "I can hear him. You want to trade places?" Anyway, so this is an unprepared speech. I put these remarks together, the slides together, just for this group. Probably the only time I've ever been given, so it's not an elevator speech. It's not a polished thing. If there's some hitches and giddy-ups, it's probably because I've never done it before. But it shows. I'm going to tell you a few things. First of all, I wanted to tell you what I did in the Navy, about the airplane I flew, the role that it played. I'm going to talk a little bit about our role in Vietnam. Along the way, you're going to find out why I learned after 4 years at the Naval Academy, finishing everything I said with Beat Army, that I learned that I loved the Army. When I met him in Vietnam, I fell in love with the Army, and it's a love affair that exists to this day. And if you can make it to the end, I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer on how pilots get their call signs. And I think if you can hang on that long, you're going to really find that interesting. So, go ahead and get started. Look at that, it actually works. This is something that this crowd can really understand. Vietnam is a long way from Canton, Ohio. Just fill in the blank. Dubuque, Peoria, Bronx, doesn't matter. It's a long way from anywhere, especially when you're in your early 20s. And this is how I got to the mission. I graduated from high school in 1963, went to the Naval Academy 4 years, straight to flight training. Finished flight training in 9 months. Nowadays, it takes almost 4 years. I was too stupid to know that the reason they needed pilots so bad is because they were being shot down in handfuls in Vietnam. So and I'm going to be flying a P-3 aircraft assigned to Patrol Squadron 50 at Moffett Field, California. It's the south end of San Francisco Bay. This is the P-3, for those of you not familiar. The Cold War started right after World War II, and they needed an anti-submarine warfare aircraft. Lockheed thought that they could take the Electra aircraft, which was a jet engine with a prop on the front, and it was going to be well adaptable to the ASW mission and Maritime Patrol mission. And it was. It's a beast. It is tough, it's strong, it's fast. The propellers allow it to operate low, which is where you have to be when you're prosecuting a submarine. Had a lot of endurance, would stay up for 15 hours. We regularly flew 12 to 14-hour patrols with 4 hours on station. If you remember, at the beginning of the Cold War, the biggest threat was the nuclear threat, the Russian nuclear threat. Missiles aren't what they were today. And so the big worry was Russian submarines. At any given time for 50 years, there was 2 or 3 submarines, Russian submarines, that were stationed off the west coast, and 3 or 4 that were stationed off the east coast, all ballistic missile submarines, all carrying missiles that were targeting the United States. Our job, the airplane, was built to go out, locate them, and make sure that we knew where they were. And we did that for 50 years until the late 90s. So anyway, derivative of the Electra had all the best parts of a jet and had the best parts of a prop. Never caught on as a commercial aircraft simply because the jet age overcame it. It was the bridge between reciprocating engines and jets, and it was short-lived. P-3 was designed to replace 2 other aircraft, the P-2 Neptune, which was land-based, and the P-5 Marlin. You can't tell by this picture, but the Marlin was gigantic. It's a huge, I don't know how they got that thing off the water with 2 engines and some jet bottles, but huge airplane. The Neptune, they had built almost 1,200 of those. P-3 run was 757, but the Electra aircraft, there was only about 140 of those made. So that gives you some scale. About 285 or so P-5s were built. So the P-3 was to replace those 2 airplanes as ASW. Keep the Neptune in mind. 1,200 of those were made. That's going to come up again in just a couple of minutes. So P-3, if you want to look at some of the statistics on the P-3, it had 16 hard points on the wing. It carried all kinds of armaments, had a bomb bay, carried torpedoes, nuclear depth charges, regular depth charges, and it was very adaptable to a lot of missions. It's just a really great airplane. Cold War. After World War II, it became in conflict with the communist threat overseas, primarily North Korea, China, Russia, and all their proxies. The biggest fear was nuclear attack. I said that the Russians routinely had ballistic missile submarines off both coasts of the United States that we needed to take care of. So the P-3's primary job was to monitor that threat and ensure that we knew where they were when they were there, and also to provide long-range surveillance for shipping lanes and also in transiting submarines. This is a little slide that shows what the P-3 did. The classic ASW mission was to drop sonobuoys. Sonobuoys were about a tube about 3 feet long, had some fins on it so it could auto-rotate to the water. As soon as it hit the water, SALT activated a cable of a varying length depending on the threat and the water conditions that you were working. It would drop a hydrophone down and it would listen. Totally passive, nobody knew that they were there, and they would pick up sound. So you put out a field of maybe 50 or 60 of these over a large period, and as you found submarine noises or auxiliary motors that were in submarines, in a hydrophone, you'd see if you could get another hydrophone, You draw circles of probability. When they intersected, you go and drop a smaller pattern until you got it down to where you could attack. Once you got it to that point, then you drop down to 200 feet off the water, 1,000 miles from land, and you would prosecute the submarine. You could prosecute it passively using the stinger on the back of the airplane, which is the MAD gear, the magnetic anomaly detection. The Earth has magnetic lines that are pretty stable. If a large metal object is denoted in the middle of it, it disrupts that field, and you can monitor that through the MAD gear on the back of the airplane. If the MAD gear indicated a large metal object that was disrupting the field, you knew you were on top of the submarine. So you could passively attack once you got a baseline and a speed down low with a searching torpedo. Or you could go active, which was a sonobuoy that actually sent out a signal, ping across the sub, and come back, and you get exact location. Didn't like to use that because as soon as you pinged them, they knew you were there. The other way, they never saw you coming, and you could get to attack right there. That was the classic pattern of ASW. And the reason it was so effective is because the Russians had a large fleet of trawlers, and they mapped the ocean floor, and they used features on the ocean floor to orient themselves geographically. So you knew that if there was a seamount that was the Russians used as an anchor point, you knew they were in that area somewhere. They hang around there. If they were going to launch, they'd go to the seamounts. They know exactly where they were. The U.S. went the other way. It's hard to believe, but the first GPS-type satellite, the Transit, was launched in 1960. And so the United States went to external positioning, which was totally different, just a different way of doing it. But the seamounts never moved. GPS positioning moves all the time. So long term, that was a better way to go. But we knew about where they were. We just didn't know enough to attack. Sonobuoys. Just talked about the sonobuoys. Remember those. They're going to come up in a minute, too. Long-range surveillance, when you can fly for 15 hours between 200 feet and 30,000 feet, there's a lot of utility you can get out of that airplane. And also take a look at the last one. Intelligence gathering. A big platform had 27 stations in the airplane. Everything was on rails, so you could replace and you could bring gear in, and it was really great for intelligence gathering. And how did we do? I think the quote from the Russian commander-in-chief of the Soviet Navy in the 90s probably says it all. Want to know where our subs are? Look up where you see a P3, that's where they're at. Very effective. My favorite picture out of all this long career is that one in the middle. Submarine popped up with its periscope to see what was up there, and what he saw was a P3 with the bomb bay doors open, bearing down. So you see the scope, the lines of the scope from the periscope. It's a great picture. But the other thing was, we talked about intelligence gathering. Immediately after World War II, the United States set up an intelligence program called Bigger Shadow. They primarily flew it with Navy EC-121s, electronic EC-1s. They would fly up and down the coast of Russia, of North Korea, of China, and they would do two things. Number one, they would establish freedom of navigation. The international limit was 12 miles. The Russians would routinely say that they owned the water out to 200 miles. We would fly down a 12-mile line just to let them know that we knew that there was an international boundary and we were on it. That was the original Beggar Shadow. A lot of the airplanes got shot down. Nobody's ever seen them again. They didn't have any way of monitoring them. Most was an EC-121 that was shot down like in 1954, lost 28 people that were on board. But the Air Force also flew the missions with B-54s and B-57s. Beggar Shadow morphed into a PARPRO flight, which is peacetime aerial patrol. Same thing, we'd fly up and down the coast, and we actually were trying to get their fire control radar to lock onto us. A high boy, the Air Force RC-135 that you see, which was Sky King, would watch, and whenever they lit off their radar, They would map the characteristics of the radar, and over a number of years, they knew every radar that was in use, where it was at when a new one came on board, where it got moved. They knew everything about it, complete data. They couldn't help you, but they could sure map, and at least you knew that somebody knew where you were. And then that morphed, that lasted until the 70s. Then it just went into freedom of navigation, which they do to this day. Whenever you read in the paper about a destroyer or an airplane flying between Taiwan and China, we're just doing a freedom of navigation to let them know that we know. But before I could do any of that, I had a stop to make. Finished flight training. The replacement training for the P-3 was at Moffett Field on one side, and they had operational squadrons on the other side. I finished training in July 2nd, 1969, just turned 24, and went across the field July 2nd. July 4th, left for Wake, short stop at Wake, short stop at Okinawa, and landed in Cam Ranh Bay 3 days after I finished training. Now, Cam Ranh Bay, for those of you that served, was the second largest base in Vietnam to Tan Son Nhut. Being there basically classified you as a REMF, but we got shot at a lot, so I don't take too much grief on that. North-south runway, right on the coast. The ocean side was all Air Force, and it had all the things that Air Force brings to the table. A commissary, lots of clubs, USO shows all the time, a hospital with nurses and everything like that. They own the other side, and they had the beach. And the beach was so nice. I think you remember the TV show China Beach. That was modeled after Cam Ranh Bay. I mean, it's the best beaches you ever saw, and now it's one of the primary resort locations in Asia. The other side was not so lucky. We had the jungle, and in the jungle there were sappers, which are now called shooters. They would come through from the jungle, throw satchel charges toward the airplane. A lot of gunfighting, howitzers could reach, and stuff like that. So the east side, or the west side of the field, the jungle side of the field was not so fortunate. But we were there with everything that wasn't Air Force. Everything that was Air Force was on the beach side. Everybody else was there. So what's that mean? We're talking about Navy. There's the P-3 again. The P-3s were based there. We also had Air America, which was the transport arm of the CIA. And, of course, we had the CIA themselves here pictured doing what they did best that so many of us get to enjoy in our later years of life. They distributing the Agent Orange, which was also stacked up over there amongst all of us. I can't really quantify this anymore, but I think we had a couple of barbecues that we made out of 50-gallon drums of Agent Orange. I mean, talk about, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, that's what they had. We also had the first radio research company of the 224th Radio Research Battalion, the Army. The Army, crazy cats. And this is where I learned to love the Army. The Army at the time had a tremendous ability in counter electronics. What they didn't have is they didn't have an aircraft that was big enough to handle it. The Air Force, when the Air Force broke off, they took most of the airplanes. They didn't take many of the helicopters because they could get shot at. No, that's nice to say. But the biggest thing that the Army had was the C-123, and it wasn't really big enough to carry the gear that they needed to do counter electronics. The Navy had a solution. Remember, we were retiring 1,200 P-2s. So they went down to Marana, and the Army took loan of 6 P-2s, loaded them up all that gear, and they were in Vietnam. The mission was to fly up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and do counter-espionage, counter-electronics. Before they could ever fly one mission, they were grounded from that mission because they were afraid that the rudimentary efforts in counter-electronics would affect us more than it would affect the enemy and disturb our electronics, so they never flew that mission. But what they did do was start to do human intelligence. they would have linguists on board, and the linguists would interrupt, put out false red flag messages, and they also served as the interrogators when they had somebody that needed to be interrogated back at home base in Vietnam. We stop and just do a little geography lesson because it's important to the rest of the presentation. The French had a colony in Indochina since the mid-1800s. It consisted of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Thailand, which was called Siam back in those days, somehow avoided all that, and they stayed independent the whole time. But immediately after World War II, Vietnam declared their independence, and they immediately started fighting with the French. And this was primarily the northern part of Vietnam. In 1954, a committee got together, Russia, China, France, and decided they were going to partition the country as they did in Korea. Hard to believe that they partitioned Vietnam. It worked so well in Korea, but they did. And so they drew a line along the 17th parallel. Now, what this did was separate the North from the South. The South was sympathetic to the French. The French really, what they wanted was rubber. That's the primary thing. They didn't want Cambodia for anything. They didn't want Laos for anything, but they wanted the rubber and some foodstuffs that the Vietnamese could produce in the southern part of the state. No meaningful agriculture in the north. Most of the population was in the north. All of the industry was in the north. They had a broad border with China, and so they had all the ingredients to foment a communist rebellion coming from the north. The French were happy with a weak government that was sympathetic to them in the south, which proved their undoing. What they didn't anticipate was the degree of fervor that the communist north would have in trying to reunite the country under communist rule. And with China right next door, they really had more of anything that they need. So when those of you that were in the highlands or up around the DMZ, you know that's where most of the fighting was. You take a look at the geography. How do you get supplies down to the south if you're running an operation from the north? You can't do air. We own the air. Besides, where are you going to land? And if you try to parachute stuff in, it's jungle. So you can't do it. There's two ways to get stuff down to the south, and that was either by land or by sea. That's where the Ho Chi Minh Trail comes in. It was codenamed Steel Tiger. You can see that most of it's in Cambodia. And Cambodia had declared themselves neutral and independent. They were neither. They were very closely aligned with the North, and they allowed the movement of equipment. And at various times throughout the tenure of the Vietnam War, we bombed various parts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and then told the American public that we weren't in Cambodia at all. Not until Nixon came in, when he said, to hell with that, he had rolling thunder and he just bombed the shit out of it. And I think one of the reasons why it ended when it did is because they knew that we weren't playing nice anymore. But you can see how the problem, most of the trail was down through Cambodia, and when they got to where they were going to shoot off into the country. So we had to control the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They only traveled at night. If you potholed it, they'd work like little dickens and they have it all repaired for the next day and they come rolling through there again. All of us spent time over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So the Navy had a squadron called VO-67. Fixed wing, V means fixed wing, observation. 67 was the year that it was founded. It was 12 P-2s. They used the sonobuoys that I talked about in ASW. They modified them for use over land. They would fly low and slow over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and drop these sonobuoys and then listen for truck movements. They had 12 airplanes. 3 of them got shot down. 27 crew members. And the squadron was only in existence for 500 days till they realized that it just wasn't going to work. The equipment was not suited to that mission. They tried to put on a directional beacon so that the noise could have a direction, but all that did was alert the enemy to where this slow P-2 was going to be within the next 5 or 10 minutes, which was one of the reasons they got lost. They had to stay low, they had to stay slow, or they couldn't precisely seed the sonobuoys and if they were too fast, they would break up on deployment. Along the same time, the Crazy Cats were formed. And we talked about them with the counterinsurgency or counter-electronics capability that they had. They got the P-2s from around. There were 6 of them. And even though they never flew the mission, they flew the human mission. And it was also low and slow. So they were all Vietnamese linguists. And some of the wildest people I've ever seen in my life. The majority of the pilots were chief warrant officers. And they were crazy cats. They were great. And even better than that, they had a 24/7 bar in Cameron Bay called the Sandman Lounge, where they had a continuous bartender. Whoever wasn't flying a mission was the bartender, and it was open 24/7. Here's a couple of my shipmates enjoying time while Chief Warrant Officer Henderson's acting as a bartender in the Sandman. But now to the sea part. We talked about the land. I was there for an operation called Market Time. It was flown by the Navy, ships, aircraft, Coast Guard was involved, Air Force got involved every once in a while, and this was to stop the interdiction, or to interdict weapons that were being brought down from the north into the south. And you can see it was covered the entire coast. They must have 1 million fishing boats out there. They would have boats that were disguised as fishing boats, loaded with ammunition and arms. They'd hang around inside the fishing fleet, and whenever it was time, they'd break for shore. Our job was to go out, take a look, get down to 100, 200 feet, check out each boat, and we saw one that looked hinky, then depending on which tour you're talking about, we either took it out or we would call somebody in who was a better shooter than us, which was just about everybody, to do the job for us. And it was kind of funny because, they say, how do you know that you had the right boat? Well, it was pretty easy. If you flew over a boat and you made a turn to come back around, as soon as they saw you turning, they were bailing out of that boat because they knew what was coming. And if you see guys jumping overboard in the South China Sea, you knew that was a gun runner. And when it went off, it was pretty spectacular. Wasn't much fishing getting done that day. So anyway, it's a market time flights. We're mostly in Cameron Bay, 12-hour missions, never got above 1,000 feet. Sometimes we were up in Da Nang. Sometimes the lucky ones got around to Thailand, to Utapao, but that was pretty rare. Most of the time we ended up back in Cameron Bay and went straight to the Sandman Lounge. Yankee Station, you can see that's where the carriers were, that's where the destroyers, that's the firing line up there. We would patrol all the way up to Yankee Station and then back down. Long flights, hot, terrible conditions, but at least we weren't in the highlands. And that was the Seabourn. So that was, and the other thing is, one time, he's tried to bring a cargo ship around and dock in Sihanoukville at the tail end of Cambodia. As soon as we found out about that thing was on the bottom of the ocean, and the Coast Guard sent up a barrier around that port. And they never had another attempt to do that. They had to go back to the fishing boats to try to get the stuff in that way. And you say, what was the result? Were we happy with the result in Vietnam? No. I think there was a lot of bad targeting. I'll tell you, in my later years, we would go to the Naval War College, and we saw the war plans for Vietnam before they started fighting. We ran the war game with those war plans, and we won every time. And if we'd have just followed the plan, we would have won that war in no time, because we were taking out their industry, we were taking out their ability to resupply. And because of the pressures from various places, primarily McNamara and his group of 20-year-olds, they wouldn't use the targets that would just cripple the North to where they didn't want to fight anymore. You say, well, okay, was that a lost effort? Did we learn anything? Well, yeah, I think we learned a lot. I think you're seeing right now in real time that we really learned a lot. But here's Norman Schwarzkopf. He was a captain in Vietnam. Here's General Chuck Horner. He flew out of Korat in Vietnam. And here's Admiral Stan Arthur. He flew A-4s off a Yankee station in Vietnam. Those are the three people who ran the war in Desert Storm. And they all got together and said, this is bullshit, it's never going to happen again. And you saw the result. And we've learned from that and even taken it to the next steps. So if there's anything that came out of Vietnam besides what we all know, the fact that the future military and the attitude towards the military and how to use it was born right there. And these men are the living testament to that. Throw up a couple of random stats to you. There's a lot of miscommunication, misinformation about Vietnam going around. This is as most accurate as we can. There's a couple of them that really pop out at you. You look at the number of aircraft that were lost. Look at the number of helicopters that were lost. It's just a tremendous effort, and there was a lot of casualties. I also personally like the one that we had 2.7 million people serve, but over 13 million claimed to have served. So that's about 11 million posers out there. And you see the rest of it. There's a lot of misconception about the race, about the educational status, who went to Vietnam and who didn't. You see the volunteers, only 38% of the people that were drafted actually ended up gone. And, it's really sad, but 17,000 of the casualties were married. We had 5 that were only 16 that were killed. And right now, all of us, we're losing between 300 or 500 vets a day from various ailments. A couple more randoms, and then I think that I agree with everything on here. You can see that 91% were glad they served. They said they'd serve again, even knowing what they know now, and that the political will and interference was the primary reason why the result was what it was. But we have this. This is probably one of my favorite slides. Whenever you talk about the new generation and they make fun of you because they shuffle or I have trouble getting up and down off the stage, just remember we are more badass than they will ever be. So you're doing great. So let's do this now. Call signs. It all started with Top Gun. Nobody knew what a call sign was before Top Gun, and everybody knew what a call sign was. Everybody wanted to know about it. Well, the call sign started in the 1930s when air-to-air combat started using radios, because you couldn't yell, "John, there's a MiG on your wing," because you'd have 3 guys turning at the same time. So everybody needed a unique call sign. It's assigned by the junior officers. So when you get to a squadron, and we'll cover this in just a couple of minutes, there's a couple of ways you get a call sign, but they're given to you. You don't pick it, and the seniors don't pick it. Although the commanding officer has a veto, because if it's pretty racy, he can't afford to have that being called out in mixed company. Short, because we can't say, "Hey, Lord Llewellyn, you've got a MiG on your tail." It's got to be short, and it's got to be. You can change. There's a couple. In a minute, we'll see how call signs come about, and they can be changed if a superior event happens, which dictates that you should be called something different. And the last is a dead fast rule. You never pick your own. That is a kiss of death. You do not pick your own. So take a look at these 3 fine officers. Got Dan Cheever, John Cotton, and Carol Holtgren. What do you suppose their call signs are? Dan Cheever's underachiever. John Cotton was balls. Cotton balls. Carol Holtgren, she was Revlon. These are their call signs. John, I tell you, I know John real well. He really tried to ditch his call sign, but it doesn't happen. You live with it forever. So having said that, look at these 2 officers. Here's John Meyer. His call sign was camel. Why do you think he was camel? What's the only mammal that can't swim? And who failed his swimming test down in Pensacola? So from then on, John Meyer was camel. So knowing that, what do you think my call sign was? I had to change my name tag just so I wouldn't give it away. But we'll talk about how they come. Here's the ways, most of the ways the call signs are assigned. Sometimes they're a takeoff on a name, sometimes they're an event. Maybe it's just something about the person, and some are kind of obvious. I'll give you an example. Don Vlasic, his call sign was Pickles. Vlasic Pickles, right? How about Tom Hole, Donut Hole. John Lay, Frito. Scott Swift, Not So. Snot, Steve Butter. Snot Butter. Special, Ed Flores, Special Ed. Fingers, John Goldfingers. And the current air boss for the Navy, John Veracissimo, he's V8. Or it could be an event. Go to the next line. Who do you think failed air navigation? Magellan. Who do you think was left in the water and sea survival when the helicopter was supposed to pick everybody up? Fishbait. Who do you think ended up on the desk when a rat ran through the ready room? Killer. Stain. Who couldn't get out of the aircraft in time to make it to the head? Who do you think hit a deer on takeoff? Casper. Who had a rough night before and fell asleep in the briefing sheet white as a ghost? Or Lightning, finished last in the cross-country race. Sometimes it's about him. Sputnik, round head. Wingnut, big ears. Hoser, the nose. Knuckle, not a hair on his head. Wedge, the simplest of all tools. Kelvin, absolute zero. Axis, Japanese mother and a German father. And then my favorite, Duchess. He showed up at the squadron demanding to be called Duke. To the day he died, he was Duchess. And others are obvious or not obvious. Soupy, everybody knows a Soupy Campbell, Streaker, self-explanatory, Mac, McLaughlin, Fitzsimmons, Shorty, tall guy, chunky, maybe a chunky guy, I don't know. But that's how it is. But remember Top Gun? Val Kilmer was Iceman. Was that a cool call sign? Wouldn't you love to be called Iceman, Viper, Cobra, something like that? There really was an Iceman. Iceman was in the Miramar O Club working on a woman at the bar trying to get her to leave with him. She finally said yes, and he didn't know what to do. He froze up, and from then on, he was Iceman. Next to that is a sea survival suit. We carried those in the P3. It would enable us to stay alive in the frigid Pacific if we had to go in. Really hard to get on, really hard to get off. Watertight, and you can see it's a real pain. Well, guess who had an accident while he was in his poopy suit? For the rest of my life. To this day, after 50 years of marriage, we'll be in a grocery store or something. Sharon will say, "Hey, poop." I answer her, and about 25 people are just looking at each other. So now you know about call signs. So whenever you ask somebody a call sign, don't take any grief. There's always a reason, and it's usually a good one. But I'll just finish up with this slide. I really like the one with the women. Introduce you to your grandmas. We did have a time of it. It wasn't all good, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. That's all I have. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to entertain them. Sure.
How do you track submarines now?
Now it's primarily through Intel. The satellite technology can track them down to about 200 feet below the water, so they keep track of them with satellites. Every battle group has at least one nuclear attack submarine that trails, and between a combination of those three, they know exactly where they are. And there, frankly, is not that great a threat anymore. The P-8, which is a derivative of the 737 airplane, replaced the P-3s. The last ASW P-3s just got retired about 2 years ago, and they're doing over-the-target targeting, over-the-horizon targeting, and intelligence surveillance, and they have some ASW capability, but the kill part of it is primarily left to the attack submarines. That's it.
Any other questions? Admiral, if you would allow me, if you could step right over here, please, sir. We'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Order of the R.E.D. And this certificate states that we hereby recognize and commend Rear Admiral James P. Schear, United States Navy retired, for his honorable military service, veteran and community support initiatives, and support of the East Valley Red Friday Patriots.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And furthermore, we would like to have you wear this Red Friday lapel pin as a reminder of this particular event, and also your continued support of what Red Friday really represents for our deployed service members. So if you don't mind, I would like to take a moment and pin this right on here. And we hope that you'll have the opportunity to promote the mission of R.E.D. But one other thing that I would like to present, and that is, this is the United States Navy 250th anniversary pin, and I'm sure that this is something that you will definitely wear with pride.
Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You know, the Navy has a battle cry as well, and it's called Hoo-yah. Can we give this man a hoo-yah? Hoo-yah! There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have a few announcements that I would like to make. One, joining us again this morning is Thayer Verschoor from Congressman Andy Biggs' Arizona 5th District Office. Congressman Biggs is sponsoring a Veterans Drop Zone event on Saturday, May the 9th, and it will run from 10 to 2 p.m., 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This will be a nonstop resource fair for veterans and for also senior benefits. It will be held at the American Leadership Academy Applied Technologies campus, which is located on East Pecos Road in Mesa. Our Red Friday group had a booth there last year. We will have a booth there again this year. But if perchance you would like to be able to explore a number of veteran services that are available through a host of organizations here in the Valley, this would be a very good event for you to attend. Thayer has some flyers on this particular event that will be located at the greeting desk upon your departure if you have available that Saturday, May 9th. Also, please be advised that we have scheduled guest speakers to join us for the upcoming month of May. I think you'll find their presentations to be very informative, so please plan to be in attendance and support our speakers and demonstrate our appreciation for their support of this program. You know, on Friday, May 22nd, only 4 weeks from today, this Red Friday group will celebrate our 7th year anniversary. 364 consecutive Friday morning assemblies honoring America's deployed warfighters. So we do plan to have a special commemoration for that event. I encourage you to join us for that. And beginning today, we will distribute event tickets for those of you definitely planning to attend on the 22nd, or for your guests as well. Those tickets will allow us to predetermine the number of folks that will attend and then coordinate that number with the kitchen staff so that they can plan for meals accordingly. So if you take a ticket, please make sure you will be in attendance. If for any reason something comes up where you will not be able to attend, please return the ticket. This year, Memorial Day will fall on Monday, the 25th of May. So the following Friday, May 29, we will have a post-Memorial Day program here at this Red Friday group. Hope you plan to attend that very special event. Now, last week, we announced a fund drive for the Chandler headquartered nonprofit organization called Packages from Home. And that fund drive is to replenish their resources for care packages that are directed to our armed forces personnel that are deployed overseas. Joanne Baldwin, Joanne, raise your hand. Is she right here? Joanne is the community service chairman of this American Legion Post 27 Auxiliary. And she is also a member of Post 27's Honor Guard. Joanne's auxiliary group is collaborating with Packages from Home, and to date, they have coordinated with 14 community partners who have donation bins collecting items for those care packages. Now, the funds contributed by this Red Friday group for this campaign will be used to cover the postage costs to send those packages overseas. The shipping cost on these packages is a minimum of $20 per package. So Joanne is also coordinating a letter campaign with Valley High Schools such as JROTC students, honor student groups, and the Apache Junction Public Library and Parks and Recreation Department. And the purpose of the letter and postcard campaign is to encourage, support, and thank our deployed service members. Each care package will have one of these letters and postcards placed inside them. Next Friday, May the 1st, is the final week for the Packages from Home fund drive. So, if you wish to donate cash or a personal check this morning, a donation jar will be available at the greeter desk upon your departure. Personal checks can be made out to Joanne Baldwin. I want you to know that last week we had a very generous contribution to this particular program, and on behalf of Joanne and the Packages from Home program, thank you very much. But we still will be open for donations. Also, I want to give a shout out to those of you who have participated in the 100X fund drive for the Arizona Veterans Honor Tour. As you know, this nonprofit organization mission is to recognize veterans who currently reside in Arizona who have continued to serve their communities as volunteers for a host of veteran initiatives. The organization's director is Nancy Fassbender. And as announced last Friday, Nancy has an arrangement with all Arizona Red Robin restaurants, except for the Chandler stores, to assist with this fundraising for the Arizona Veterans Honor Tour. It's a one-day only event where Red Robin will donate 20% of any food items that you purchase to the Honor Tour. And the offer is good only on Thursday, April 30th. So mark your calendars, plan to dine out. There are some flyers that Nancy has for this particular event. Nancy, unfortunately, went into the hospital last evening. She very likely may be discharged today, if not tomorrow, but she had hoped to be able to have another drawing today in recognition of those of you who have contributed through the 100X program. We will make that drawing next Friday. So to our guests, thank you for joining us today, and we sincerely hope that you'll return to Schear and support our mission. Please know that you will always be welcome here at our Red Friday assemblies. And as a final reminder, let's not overlook the importance of our Red Friday mission to keep our deployed warfighters in our thoughts and prayers, and to continue to demonstrate our support for these fine men and women. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.